Okay, so, welcome back. Now, the first video I did was really just covering preliminary stuff, talking about the London production and stuff like that. Now I really want to talk about the DVD version of the Australian version of Love Never Dies, which is a significant improvement, and I completely am in love with this production. It is fantastic, and I loved the music of the sequel before. I loved the story. I loved a lot of it, but I definitely felt that it was very flawed, especially the intro to Act 1 and all of that. It was just totally a mess. So I want to go into that. But first, before I can go into any of that, let's talk about the controversial issue of timelines. Now, the timeline of the timeline that goes on for Love Never Dies has always been kind of like in contention, because originally in the programs that have been recent, it's been saying that Phantom takes place in 1881, and that Love Never Dies takes place in 1907, and those two things just don't mesh together. That is not 10 years' time in between. And then people are upset with the idea of the date for Phantom changing. But the date for Phantom has changed before. The very original production says that the prologue takes place in 1905, and that the main bulk of the show takes place in 1861. That was the original timeline. And then somewhere, I believe, somebody told me it was in the 90s, before Love Never Dies was even on the map, they changed the date. And if anybody knows why they changed the date, please throw it in the comments, because I don't know why. But by the time, like, the 2000 reprint of the album came out, you know, that nice one that came with the full binded libretto book, and it was like a 2-disc, with the glossy Phantom of the Opera box logo on the front of it and everything. By the time that came out, they were saying that the prologue was 1911, and the show took place in 1881. So they've changed the date before, and I don't know why they changed it then, because this was before the sequel was even a thing, but they did. So there's that. And now for Love Never Dies, they've changed the date to be late 19th century. So the idea is that the prologue takes place in 1905, and that the main bulk of the show takes place in 1893 for Act 1, 1894 for Act 2. Because obviously Act 2 starts with the New Year's celebration of Masquerade. So we know that it takes place January 1894. So, there's all of that. Now, the issue with these dates, a lot of people have brought up to me, is the costumes. The costumes are very Victorian age, and a lot of them have these big bustles, especially if you look at the Royal Albert Hall performance. You see a lot of bustles. Were not particularly common during 1894 fashion in France, but I had pointed out to me that the bustles, except for Carlotta's bustle, which was very low level, which was still kind of popular for the bigger girls in France during that time, I've been told, and it was just very slight. You don't see those huge bustles unless they're in costume. Like, the gigantic bustles are not seen unless it's like a costume for a production. Except for when Christine is singing Wishing You Were Somehow Here Again. That is not a costume. That is like something she's wearing, and that's a huge bustle on that dress. Absolutely huge. But I had somebody else point out to me the fact that she's an orphan, she's lower class, she really doesn't have any money, most likely because she's living at the opera house. She's just wearing a hand-me-down from the opera house, and that's probably just like an old-style dress that she's just wearing, because she can't afford her own. Because they point out that in the Phantom of the Opera number, that white dress that she's wearing, which I thought was meant to be a nightgown, but a lot of people interpret it as a dress. But anyway, it's got that very 1890s silhouette where it's just very simple, it's just straight down, like tucked in at the waist, it still had the corseting going on. That was more of the 1890 silhouette. So minus the dress that she wears for, Wishing You Were Somehow Here Again, she pretty much fits into the silhouette of the time if you look at that dress. So it's kind of weird. So it kind of depends on how you interpret the costumes there. But you can tell the costumes were definitely developed with 1861 in mind. So all of the subsequent changes are a little odd, but you can still defend them, and it's theater. Theater can be interpreted a million different ways, and that's the great thing about theater, so you can find ways to defend anything. But yeah, for the sake of L&D though, we are saying that the timeline is this. So, 1894 is when Act 2 happens. Act 2 probably takes no more than a week in the timeline of Phantom. I don't know, though. It could be longer, because it takes a while to put an opera on stage while they're, setting up for Don Juan. But I feel like that they're doing this pretty rushed. So, if nothing else, it takes like a month. So, either way, the whole show is done by, very early 1894. Now, for Love Never Dies, the idea is that during this gap between, after she leaves off and the Phantom lets her go, and she leaves off with Raoul, and she goes off with him, that somewhere in here, she ends up having sex with the Phantom, and she ends up having a night of passion with him. This had to have happened during, late 1894, maybe early 1895. Because the boy needs to be born in 1895. So it's not like you can say, oh, it happened in the middle of 1895 when they got together. No, that's not possible, because then the boy would have been born in 1896, and he wouldn't be 10 years old. He'd be 9. So, there's that. So my argument is that it happens very late 1894, 1895. So there's a pretty big gap of time between this 10 years that the Phantom was talking about before he left Paris. He doesn't immediately leave Paris. The thing that makes him leave Paris is they give you a prologue at the beginning of the Love Never Dies DVD. And it says, 1895, a fire has consumed the Opera Populaire, and this mob goes to find him and kill him, and all they find is his mask. And I firmly believe that after his night of passion with Christine, he leaves Christine, but he doesn't want Christine to ever find him again, because Christine is in love with him in this interpretation of the Phantom. Christine is in love with him, and he's left, but he still thinks that maybe Christine will try to track him down. So what does he do? He fakes his own death, and that's what the fire's all about. And then the Giris, with now their opera house burned down, thank you Phantom, have no place to go, so they take the Phantom with They take the Phantom and they hide him, and they all decide to go to New York. And the Phantom becomes this huge impresario there by coming up with his brilliant manipulative schemes and so on. And you figure that he actually has a good amount of money, because he's been blackmailing the theater owners of the Opera Populaire for 20,000 francs a month for how long? And how is he spending it? What would he be spending it on half the time? So you figure he's got a good amount of money on him. So they all go off to New York. And basically the Giris are his front men, and they are the ones who do all of the actions for the Phantom, but the Phantom's the one coming up with the big ideas and the big plans. So that's the idea of that. And that's how the whole timeline goes. So then 10 years after 1895 is 1905, and that's when our story starts off, and you have the beginning with the Phantom singing Till I Hear You Sing. This is a huge friggin' improvement, and it was done in the London, but by the time a lot of these changes were made in the London production, it was a little too late. The original London production had started off with this awful prologue, and this awful song, Heaven by the Sea, and the whole beginning of it is a mess. And here we get something so much better. We get him starting immediately with Till I Hear You Sing, and they've gotten rid of the stupid Christine automaton, robot sex doll thing, and replaced it with a portrait, which comes to life in the background as he sings Till I Hear You Sing, it slightly moves. And it's something that I'm upset. It's one of the it's one of the only real complaints I have about the filming of the DVD, is that there's no focus on that, so if you're looking at it in the background, you can actually see the portrait move. But they never focus on it, so a lot of people don't even notice that the portrait moves. But anyway, he sings this song, and it's just a rousing way to start up the show, which is brilliant, because it's there. Then you get into the Coney Island Waltz, which they've actually turned into a song. And the lyrics are very well done for it, actually. And that's a mixture of Glenn Slater and, at this point, Charles Hart, the original lyricist of Phantom of the Opera, has come in and started doing some lyric doctoring. And you can feel his presence in a lot of the lyric changes, because they're great improvements. And the Coney Island Waltz is fantastic as a song. And then also has, like, the mixture of the instrumentals in there, so it still works, but they've basically just cut the idea of an overture and just jumped right into the show. And I feel like that works for its benefit, because this is now modern theater. And the Coney Island Waltz wasn't doing a lot as an overture. It was the idea of, you were, after the prologue, it was like desolate, beat up Coney Island after a fire, and then you see it come back to its grandeur. The same idea as Phantom, but we've seen that before, it's been done, and now it feels trite outside of Phantom of the Opera. So the idea of changing this and just jumping right into the story is so much better. I love this. So you have the Coney Island Waltz. It's very cool, very atmospheric, and a lot of it feels very Tim Burton-like. It's very stylized, and it's dark, and it's gothic, and it's odd. And its oddity is probably the best thing it has going for it. That moves immediately into Only for You, which the lyrics have completely changed on. It's become a big group number, and it no longer is what it was before, which felt like Meg talking about being in love with the Phantom. Which, she's not talking about that, but that's what it feels like when you watch it. And of course, a lot of fans had issues with that idea. I had issues with that idea. I was like, what? But now it's kind of like, you just get this thing where it's just a big group number, and the song works. And I like the song, and it's very vaudeville, and it's very Coney, and it's very New York during 1905. So that all works out for me. And then you move on after that. Where am I? Oh yeah, the 10 Long Years duet. Now, the original song, Heaven by the Sea, sounded like a friggin' Disney number. It was awful, it was this group number, and it didn't work, and it was trying to set up information that you can convey better in other ways. So they got rid of Heaven by the Sea, but not really, because they've reorchestrated it, and it's like slower and in a minor key, beautiful string setups. I mean, it's wonderfully haunting, and it feels like a new song, where a new song was really needed, and it sets up that, Meg still thinks of Christine as a friend, and it's great, because it gives you that idea that she doesn't automatically hate Christine from the get-go, that she's excited to see Christine, and I love this idea. Because she's not there to take her spotlight or anything like that, she's just coming to perform for Oscar Hammerstein. That's all there is to it, and they have no idea what the Phantom is about to pull, which is great. It sets up the relationship between Meg and the mother. It gets out all the exposition of how they smuggled him out of Paris and got him to New York. I wish there was a little more detail here explaining what was going on and how they were his front men and so on and so forth, but Act 1 is now moving so well that adding any extra exposition I feel would be detrimental, and I'd rather have the whole there, where you can easily fill it in as an audience member. You don't need to explain every little thing. So in this case, it's there, and you don't need to, like, the audience can just infer it, and it's right there. So it's a really haunting melody, and I love this basically because it feels like a new song, and Act 1 really needed one, especially after all the cuts that they made, and this works out really well. Then you jump into Christine's arrival, and a lot of this from here is pretty much the same. Like, the structure does not really change too much from here. It's still pretty much the same as it was. Because this is when the show actually finally took off and started moving. But Christine's arrival, she gets there, and she's supposed to be picked up by Oscar Hammerstein, but the Phantom gets there first, and his freak show men pick up, who are really well done. I love the freak show people, particularly the little midget girl and the tall guy. The skinny tall guy. They're creepy and great, and even though I don't like this guy personally, really, Paul Tamboni is actually really good as the big guy, Squelch. he has this freaky presence, and again, all three of these guys feel like they can come right out of a Tim Burton movie, which really, really is what this needed. In the London show, they did not take advantage of the Coney Island setting. They did not do anything freaky or over the top with it. They didn't do anything that looked particularly gothic or scary. It just was totally a bust, the whole Coney Island setup in the London show. And here, they take full advantage of it, and it's glorious. And the costumes are great, too. I mean, Meg wears some costumes. They have, like, these weird feathery things on them, and they just look, like, odd and interesting. And I mean, odd is really the best way to put it, because the oddity here is what makes this set apart from any other show you'll see. Is the fact that everything looks individual and distinct, and every character has their own set of turf of how they look, and it's really good. Like, you wouldn't see Meg wear something that Christine would wear, you know, stuff like that, which is wonderful. But Christine arrives, and she's intercepted by the Phantom, so on and so forth, and you get to What a Dreadful Town, and then you have Look With Your Heart, which was, I love the song Look With Your Heart. It reminds me of the second cousin to Whistle a Happy Tune from The King and I. Like, if All I Ask of You is meant to be the second cousin to, Some Enchanted Evening from South Pacific, this is meant to be a throwback to that King and I relationship between the mother and the son, and it sets up how she feels about love, and the idea that she is also filled with a form of regret. Just like the Phantom, you get that from Till I Hear You Sing from the Phantom, that there's this regret of not having Christine in his life anymore, and there's the same from her set up right in the beginning with Look With Your Heart, where, love you misunderstand is love that you'll regret, which is a quote right out of that song. And it's great. And then you get to Beneath a Moonless Sky, and this is where, if you cannot accept this idea that the Christine and Phantom had a night of passion after Phantom of the Opera, just give up. If you cannot accept this after this song, if you cannot buy into it, you're just not gonna like this show on a story level. It's not the story's fault, it's just the way you interpreted Phantom. If that's not the way you saw Phantom, if you did not think Christine really loved the Phantom, that Raoul is her ideal guy, don't touch Love Never Dies, it's not a show for you. This is meant for people. This is meant for people who loved, who were sad that that Christine did not end up with the Phantom. That's really what this show is. So, but then you get to Beneath a Moonless Sky, and they set up how she thinks he's been dead for 10 years, and, like, she is pissed off, and it's great. They have given Christine, for lack of a better term, balls in this show, and her character has so much more to do. Like, in the London production, it just kind of feels like she's going with the motions, and that Christine is not a very active character. She's not even a very reactive character. She just kind of goes along with everything, and she just feels... But here, they give her, like, there's fight to her character. And she does not want to agree to the Phantom at all in performing. And they sing Beneath the Moonless Sky Once Upon Another Time. And after all that, he's just like, I want you to sing for me, I want you to perform for me, and if you don't, and he blackmails her. The blackmail is really kind of empty, because he's offering her a shit ton of money. He's offering her double what she was going to be paid with Hammerstein, which was already going to be a huge amount. So the price is ridiculous. That enough should be enough for her to say yes at this point, because they're in desperate need of the money. But he ends up blackmailing her and saying, her son will get lost on Coney Island. To me, this is just a last-ditch effort to get her to stay, and that he really is not going to do this, but he's saying he will because this is the Phantom. He has been shunned and hated and reviled most of his life. I mean, really? What else is he going to say? Like, he... You know, it's like... He's not emotionally mature enough to not stoop to that sort of level. That's the way the Phantom is. So I'm glad that's there. And I think even Christine still feels a little bit of threat by the Phantom. Like, there's a moment where her son interrupts her conversation, and he's like, being nice to the kid, being like, oh, I'll show you all of Coney, but he like lifts him up on top of the balcony, and she's like, oh my god, what are you doing lifting my son on top of the balcony? And she's like scared to shit. Which is great. But we know the Phantom's not going to do anything to the boy. That's not him. I don't even see the Phantom killing a child at all. So, like, those threats are all just empty, and he's just saying them to convince her. And, of course, you know, she agrees, and then she starts listening to the music, and it's like, or starts reading the music, and there's this wonderful swell-up of the title song for an instrumental, like, it only lasts like 20 seconds. Not even. But it's enough to get that emotional idea of crossover where she's like, oh wow. Oh wow. Things might be different. This might be different. And yeah, so you move on from that, and you get to Dear Old Friends. Dear Old Friends is also completely changed, and it feels more like the Richard Stilgoe notes going back and forth, mixed with like prima donna of like figuring out what the heck is going on in a musical number, and it's very well done. I love Dear Old Friends, and I think it's one of the highlights of Act 1. And you have now Raoul getting upset with the idea that she knew that the Phantom was the writer of the music when she agreed to perform there. And this also makes a lot more sense, because in the London production, she gets called out by Mr. Y, she's already seen the music. Like, she should have known it, like, it was the Phantom, and like, he gets upset with her in Dear Old Friends for knowing it was the Phantom in the London production, but that doesn't make as much sense because she really didn't know until she got there. Here, she knows before she agrees that it's the Phantom, and that upsets Raoul, and that it makes more sense. And I'm sorry if I'm not being particularly articulate here, because I feel like that may have been confusing. But, oh well, if you have a question about it, I'll gladly mention it in the comments if we want to have a talk back. Anyway, so the freaks during all of this lure Gustav away. And of course, Christine realizes this later and is like, crap, Gustav, where's my son? And goes run to find him. And then you get the Phantom with Gustav, and they have Beautiful and the Beauty underneath. And of course the Phantom isn't stupid and kind of realizes, oh my god, this kid is mine. Oh no. And then you get Christine's big confession scene. This is also different. In this new version, the Phantom, as soon as he finds out it's his kid, it's like, leave. Get out of here. I don't want this kid to ever know that I'm the father. Like, because that's not fair to the kid. And I release you from this whole thing. I'm sorry I called you back. This is all my fault. I should never have left. I did not know. And Christine thought he was dead, so there was no way for him to have known, or no way for her to have told him. And that's probably why his fake death had so much emotional impact on her, is because at this point she knows she's pregnant. Now, here's another thing. A lot of people argue and put into contention, how do you know it's the Phantom's kid? Because in the original London lyrics it said, on the night just before we were wed that they hooked up. In the Australian version they cut out that line. You don't know when they got together. It could have been sometime after the marriage between Raoul and Christine. So they may have not actually had sex for quite some time. We don't know. But Christine is pretty sure that the son is the Phantom's too. So I firmly believe that maybe Raoul has not been sharing their wedding bed as much, or she has not been as attracted to Raoul, after realizing, there's probably a mistake here. And I'm wondering if that is what's made Raoul a drinker. And again, a lot of this storyline's vague, and it's left up to interpretation. But Raoul has become a drinker. He's not abusive. He's not terrible. He's grumpy a lot of the time, because you can tell he's kind of miserable, and that he is a drinker. But he just seems like a man who's down on his luck and has looked at the wrong things, and the whole society is now changed around him. Like, this upper class that he belongs to is no longer kind of seen as like the way it was before. Like, especially when he gets to America, like, they're used as entertainment fodder. Half the time, there's not really a particular respect there. So all of that's changing, and he's losing his money through gambling, because he has just turned to that vice. So I don't really see him as an alcoholic so much as I see him as a gambler. And that's what's messed him up, and now he's under stress and so on. And gambling in those days was pretty common, and you can easily become a gambling addict. I mean, I know I could be. It's why I specifically do not go to casinos myself. So, I fully understand the turn of Raul's character here. And there's just so much interpretational stuff of why did he start swinging to that dark side? And is it because him and Christine are not a match? And I firmly believe that, even from Phantom of the Opera, like if you look at Why Have You Brought Us Here? Like when you listen to the two of them talking, it's like two people who aren't quite on the same page. So I'm wondering if that marriage ended up doing something to his esteem and how he saw himself, and that led him to a darker area. Either way, there's no way of knowing. They keep it vague, and it's good that they keep it vague, because it allows the audience to kind of implant themselves and their emotions and their own ideas into some of these characters. So, it allows for that interpretation, and allows for you to come up with reasons yourself for why this could have happened. All we need to know for the show is that it has happened, but the fact that it's kept loosely open is very much what makes Phantom work, and a lot of the emotions in Phantom aren't really specifically gone into, and it lets the audience put themselves into it. It's what makes Phantom so special. It's what allowed Phantom to run for so long. So, Love Never Dies doing the same thing is really a smart idea. So then we move into Act 2, and we get Why Does She Love Me? And again, this is the first time we really get to see Raul, and we get to see that he is a broken man, that he has fallen apart, and that his marriage with her has not been right. Nothing about it has really worked out. And it's because they're just not a match, and he knows that, and he doesn't understand why she's even with him. And his greatest fear is losing that. Then you get Devil Takes the Hindmost, where the Phantom totally takes advantage of Raul's gambling problem and gets him into a gentleman's bet for Christine. Now, there's some people who are like, oh, this is terrible. Why are these men doing this? But again, this is kind of like how it was in Phantom, like two men fighting over Christine. This is really what's going on here now, too. So, but the stakes are higher because now there's the sun and everything, and the Phantom was going to let her go. But then she decides, no, I'm going to stay and I'm going to sing this anyway because your music should be heard, and she clearly still loves him, and that is the moment where the Phantom's like, oh my god, she is worth fighting for, and Devil Takes the Hindmost is where he starts fighting for her. And I love that. Okay, well, I'm going to start truncating myself here because I have been talking forever, and I am 30 minutes into this. Oh my god. It'll probably be a little less because I'm going to cut out some of my gaps. Anyway, so during all this, Meg is like trying to be noticed, and the Phantom's just not paying attention to her at all, and she wants to be this big star, and the Phantom's just not paying attention to her. I think Meg sees the Phantom as kind of like a surrogate father figure. He's been running the show, he's been trying to figure out how to get everything going, they've just been the front men, so he makes the order and they follow. So in that way, he would be kind of a surrogate father figure to him, and he's just not paying attention to her, and he's always focused on Christine. And she also thinks she'll probably be rewarded like a daughter, and everything will be left to her and her mother. And as soon as this kid comes up, she goes off the deep end when she finds out about this kid. And when she finds out that the Phantom isn't at her big performance of Bathing Beauty, she completely goes off the deep end. And I would too. You're doing all of this work and all of this stuff, and you're trying to be noticed, and you've spent 10 years of your life devoted to trying to create something that now is going to be ripped away from you because of this child that has popped up. Of course she goes off the deep end. And then during all of this, Christine's just making her choice of whether she's going to end up with Raul or the Phantom, and she's given a second chance at this choice, and after Love Never Dies, she does make the choice that it's going to be the Phantom, and Raoul steps off to the side and says his goodbyes to Christine through a wonderful reprise of Little Lottie, which I thought was very well done. So there's all that, and then of course the ending culminates with everything of Meg going off the deep end, and everything of everyone's selfishness just comes back to bite them. The Phantom's selfishness through Act 2 of being so focused on Christine and not paying attention to anybody else and being stuck in his own little world. Like, all of that comes back to bite him. Christine not thinking about what this decision is doing to other people, what her showing up there is doing, what going on, not really thinking about what's going on with Raoul or her son. I mean, she's now deciding to go off with the Phantom, but what is this going to do to her son? And so, I mean, there's not really much thought on her part on all of that. So there's her selfishness. Then you got Meg's selfishness of trying to be the big star, and sick of being ignored, and you have Madame Giry's selfishness, which has perpetuated everything that Meg's doing. Selfishness is what kills Christine. And it's a really tragic ending when you see her get shot, and he has to make his goodbyes. And the greatest change to the ending here is the reprise of, first off, they shortened a lot. They cut the Look With Your Heart reprise down to like a line or two, and then you get this wonderful reprise at the end of Love Never Dies, which he says to comfort Gustav after his mother's dead. And Raoul being there, and the looks of compassion on Raoul's face is wonderful. And that's Love Never Dies in the plot summary and ideas there. So, that's all of that. And now I'm actually going to talk about how I feel about the show in general.